Hello, and welcome to part 3 of 12 of Chiefs of Staff of the Axis Navies. And this one is Domenico Cavagnari, who, as we can probably guess from the name, because I've already done the the German, and the Japanese, is Italian, which is where this comes in. If you're not quite sure why this is here, well, yes, it's the Italian rank structure, and honestly, I thought I needed to explain it because the Italians are interesting. Their Contrammiraglio is, of course, Rear Admiral for them, but we would probably consider them equivalent to a Commodore. And Ammiraglio di Divisione is a Vice Admiral. And Ammiraglio di Squadra is a Lieutenant Admiral. But that would probably be Rear Admiral and Vice Admiral in what we would say. And then there's Ammiraglio di Squadra con Intentia Speciali, who is also a Lieutenant Admiral, but technically a Senior Squadron Admiral and often treated as a 4-star or Admiral. And then Ammiraglio is, of course, Admiral, which is equivalent to a 5-star or Admiral of the Fleet, theoretically. But please note, I got this off Wikipedia because I thought I would use that because that's impartial. And they have a sign which says, does not represent a military ranks comparison among NATO navals as officially stated by Stanag 2116. I know the people who are involved in Stanag 2116 discussions, and I can tell you that they all got a lot of grey hair after trying to figure out how to put in the Italian ranks into it. Because Primo Tento di Vesalio is first ship of the line, the lieutenant. Is an interesting one to try and work out. That we have positions for these ranks, but no. So, Domenico Cavagnari, his outline. And that's him standing next to Mussolini. Or as he called him, Boss. Because for while he was chief of the Italian naval staff, Mussolini was his boss. Mussolini made himself Minister of the Navy. So the dictator, the de facto dictator of Italy, because Il Duce was an interesting one, was technically Minister of the Navy. Now, we will get into this at some point, but there will be a lot of me going, why? So, Cavagnari managed to join the Accademia Navale di Livorno in 1889. He was 13 years old. That's normal in Britain, that's normal in Japan, that's fairly normal in Germany, but it wasn't in Italy. Graduates in 1895 at 19 years old. Has roughly 8 years of normal service and then manages to participate in a Far East cruise on the armoured cruiser Vettor Pisania. Returns in December 1903 and is, at this point, named adjutant to the Minister of the Navy, Carlo Mirabello. He's just aged 27. He's both young for this role and relatively inexperienced, but hey-ho. In 1914, he is promoted Capitano di Corvetta. So, that's 11 years later. He is, by this point, 38 years old. I'm doing maths in my head. 11 plus 14, 15, and 13, yeah, 28 years old. I should have really written that in my notes. And as we can see, if we go back to this previous listing, Captain de Corvetta ranks in roughly what the RN would consider a lieutenant commander. He's been in the Italian Navy since the age of 13. 25 years. And he's just made lieutenant commander. Now, yes, he started young, but just made lieutenant commander. Not exactly setting the world on fire, is he? He's got political connections. He's served attaché to a minister, all sorts of things. You would be expecting a slightly more rapid promotion rate for someone at this point if they were as good as they should be to get to where they become. During World War I, he starts in command of a coastal torpedo boat, 9 p.m. He is eventually promoted to command the 6th torpedo boat flotilla. 1917, by then, he's serving on the staff of Admiral Paolo Fon de Reville, who was then the commanding officer of the naval station at Venice. In April 1918, he's given the command of destroyer Felice Orsini. Before the war ends, he's made Capitano de Fregata and gains 3 silver medals of military valor for his service during the war. That's good. That's fairly decent, but he's risen from lieutenant commander to commander during a war which guts the Italian army and the Italian navy quite regularly. In 1922, he's made Capitano di Vascello. Now, we go back again. Capitano di Vascello is pretty much captain. So he's made normal captain. It's fine. It's a good rank to get to. It's also a good rank to sort of probably leave the navy. But he doesn't. He's given command of the Esvalatore Pantera and its flotilla, which he leads on a goodwill cruise to North Sea and the Baltic Sea in 1925. In 1927, he's made Contrammiraglio and made commander of the Accademia Naval in 1929, which he serves in this post till 1932. So you've taken an officer who, by this point, has been in the Navy for 30 years, is 43 years old, serves in that post for 3 years, so till he's 46. This, don't take this the wrong way, but this sounds like the sort of post you give an officer who you, in respect, he's done a lot of hard work, he's got a few connections, not exactly a rising star, but it's a nice post to retire out on. And then he's given command of Division, S2A Division, with the heavy cruiser Trento as his flagship. My theory at this point is that's probably someone being very nice further up in the command who thinks that, well, this allows us to promote him to really what I would probably consider the actual rear admiral position of Amelio Divisione, vice admiral. And let him retire with honor. Let him retire with a bit of a better pension. Unfortunately, at this point, in November 1933, Benito Mussolini fires the Minister of the Navy, Admiral Giuseppe Serrania, and chooses to become minister himself. Can't find any admiral who really wants to serve with him. as chief of staff, and finds Cavagnari, who apparently is prepared to become chief of the staff of the Regia Marina. And so, an officer who, frankly, has had a less than amazing career, who is not the best the Italian Navy has to offer at this point, is now chief of its staff from November 1933. So 6 or so years before war breaks out. Arguably less time than the previous two, by a long way, to prepare. After all, Fukushima doesn't have war till 1941, so, yes, he might start in 1932, but yeah, still gets roughly a decade. And Raider, of course, definitely gets a decade, starting in 1928. However, Cavagnari is starting from the greatest base in many ways for what he's required to do. Because he's not expecting to fight the Americans and the Brits. He's probably expecting to fight the French. Like Raider officially is expecting in 1928 too. And he's probably sitting there going, well, I currently have equality to the French. In fact, arguably, if you look at the quality of my ships and some of the design choices made by the French, I have quality. So he's actually starting from an advantage versus his proposed opponent. And he's got the dictator as his Minister of the Navy, as his boss. The person who he can go and moan at on a regular basis in his role as Minister of the Navy. Okay, maybe not moan, but basically go and, grouse and go, yeah, we need this, or we're having this problem, or, this is happening. You want to complain about the Air Ministry and say they're not helping? Well, sir, the beautifully run Naval Ministry, which you're doing, is so efficient, so brilliant. But it just seems our Air Ministry colleagues are just not as efficient as you, my douche. This is a man who is literally run by his ego and his stomach. And his occasionally desire for floppy hats. Various other nasty things, but I'm trying to be sarcastic here. He is easy to manipulate as anything. If this guy had been Tirpitz, the Italian Navy would have been colossal. If he'd been Fisher, goodness knows what the British would have faced. Henderson, Cunningham, Raider, even. The dictator's your Minister of the Navy. Yes, there's a DIC at the beginning of that, but use it. No, doesn't. And what are the key decisions he makes? Well, he focuses on battleships and submarines, and stalls the carrier program and the cruiser program. Yeah. He stalls the cruiser program. The big advantage the Italian Navy had were their heavy cruisers. They are joyous things to look at. And to be honest, they're light cruisers. If you're building such a strong heavy cruiser line, you can get away with having those ultra light weird cruisers. But he continues building a couple of light cruisers. He doesn't complete half of that many of them. And completely stalls the heavy cruiser line completely. I'm going, treaty? What treaty? In 1934, Japan announces leaving the treaty. The treaty is going to cease to exist in 2 years' time. Build. You've got Duke El Duce as your Minister of Navy. If there's now time to push for a carrier program and coordination of the air arm with the Navy, or perhaps the Navy's own fleet air arm and for carriers, it's then. Doesn't see the point in carriers. Battleships and submarines. Battleships and submarines. Now, you see, submarines is a good idea. Admittedly, the Mediterranean is more shallow than the North Atlantic or the South Atlantic or even the North Sea. But I can understand why submarines. It's a way of denying sea. It's sea denial. And if properly coordinated with the actions of the Regia Aeronautica, could have been very interesting. And when they were coordinated, do produce some of the most interesting results in the convoy battles. Battleships, though, I suppose it ties down British battleships, but that's not what he's building them for. He's building them to fight the French. And fine, if you're going to do that, but a cruiser line would seem to be a good, strong thing to have as your backup, especially if you're going to be fighting the French. And destroyers, lots of destroyers, and escorts. Principally because if you think about it, if you're fighting the French, do they have to send trade into the Mediterranean? No. It's going to be difficult for them, but they can have their supplies delivered to the Atlantic ports, which are a long way away from Italy, and they can bring them down via train. You're not going to get out of the Mediterranean because of the Royal Navy sitting in Gibraltar. They're not going to let you out, not enforced to go and beat up the French on the Atlantic coast. The submarines might sneak through, but it's going to be interesting, and the Royal Navy might play interesting games with that. Just out of curiosity and not wanting the French to lose too bad, because remember, the French, they're sort of relying on to take the blow of any European conflict, so they need to keep them functioning. It's a realpolitik alliance, not a alliance of friends. At this point, or at any point really, between the British and the French. They're always friends more because it makes sense for them to be friends than because they want to be. There again, that's the case in most countries. But no. He stalls. He stalls. And no, you don't have infinite resources. You never get infinite resources, even when the dictator is your Minister of Navy. But you are building these magnificent ships. You stall your carrier program. You stall your cruiser program. The things which would have given them real freedom of maneuver in the Mediterranean. Because here's the thing, if you're going to be fighting the French, the same things which apply to the Italian and the British fighting the Italian Navy apply to the Italian Navy fighting the French Navy. They have a lot of islands in the Mediterranean, and they have a lot of airfields on them. So you're going to have air power coming in which case you want the strongest air defense you can have. And even in the 1930s, look around. The Americans are building carriers, the French are operating a carrier. The Germans are talking about a carrier and keep planning on it. The Brits are building carriers. The Japanese are building carriers. The Brazilians are, I think, talking about it from memory as well. You see, have the Spanish Civil War going on. You see the power of air power and the viability in terms of a strike tool. You're providing some of that air power, which is carrying out those strikes. If you're preparing for a war against France, having a carrier, even a small carrier, which is all you pretty much need for air defense role, makes sense. Your strike aircraft are coming from your island bases. You don't need the carrier for strike, you need the carrier for air defense. Which, if you think about it, could allow you to make a really good carrier quite cheaply if its literal role is to operate fighters. They're the lightest of all naval aircraft. Maybe you add some bomber capability onto those, some fighter dive bomber sort of things, or fighter bomber sort of things. They can carry some small bombs. if you want to carry out limited strikes, but fighter reconnaissance aircraft. Yeah. And they don't. And don't get me started on the radar program, because a lot of the electronic warfare program and also things which the Italians had actually been pushing forward with in the 1920s comes to a thunderings halt under his uninspiring leadership. So, what eventually forces him gone? Well, he does eventually get forced gone. And the reason he's forced gone is because of Taranto, but more importantly, what the Italians tend to call Punto Stilla, but in British terms is called the Battle of Calabria. And pretty much it's an indecisive battle in July 1940 between a Royal Navy force of an aircraft carrier, 3 battleships, 5 light cruisers, 16 destroyers, and an Italian force of 2 battleships, 6 heavy cruisers, 8 light cruisers, and 16 destroyers. Now, if you're sitting there going, well, the British do have an aircraft carrier, but my God, the Italians have almost parity in terms of battleship numbers and have 6 heavy cruisers, 3 more light cruisers, and the same number of destroyers as the British. So let's be honest, that force could well counterbalance the superiority in battleship and aircraft carrier, especially at close range. And pretty much the force is 2 convoys going. The Italians are escorting 1 convoy, the British are escorting another convoy. The British were sailing from Alexandria to Malta, and the Italians were sailing from Naples to Benghazi. The Italian fleet was under Campione, and the British fleet, well, how do I put this politely? Cunningham had gone along himself because he could, and because he was taking his flagship. Now, the point is that this battle should have been decisive either way, but if the Italians had managed to close, and considering the aircraft carrier is the Eagle, they could have closed, they should have been able to force it and win it. But the casualties are 1 light cruiser damaged and 2 destroyers damaged on the British side, and on the Italian side, 1 battleship damaged, 1 heavy cruiser damaged, and 1 destroyer damaged. It's indecisive, and the convoys reach their endpoint, but most of the damage done to the British is actually done by the Regia Aeronautica, not the Navy. And this means he falls from grace. He gets removed and he gets replaced. And the interesting thing, and we're going to be getting into this in the series, is that the Italians go through a lot more admirals than the Germans, and the Japanese go through a lot more admirals than the Italians. This is why this is a series which is 12 long parts, and only 2 parts of those are added in extras, in that I've added in 2 other senior admirals who really matter on the Axis side in World War II in terms of their staff and command roles. They're both Germans, so there are 4 Germans involved to make it up to 12 parts. But the Germans only had 2 chiefs of staff in World War II, Raeder and Donitz. The Italians? Well, because of Cavagnari, who is succeeded by Arturo Riccardi, who is in turn succeeded as in post by Rafael de Cotten, who is pretty much the last host, last chief of staff of the Regia Marina. He is in. He basically ends up resigning in protest by the Paris peace treaties. He's appointed post Mussolini, and the rest, the 5, are from the Japanese Navy. So it's going to be an interesting group to look at. But it's kind of interesting in that I would argue the regime which is the most toxic and strange achieves the most continuity of command in its chief of staff from the Axis navies. That's the German one. In that, honestly, Donitz is pretty much Raeder's largely enough de facto right-hand man. So when he succeeds him, he knows kind of what Raeder was already doing and sort of agrees on most of it and supports most of it. Maybe has a different style and different relationship with Speer, but the Italian Navy will be getting into him, but honestly, the fact that Arturo Riccardi was not in charge earlier of the Italian Navy pre-war is probably a good thing for the Allies because he's pretty much the Italian Navy's aviation specialist. And if anyone would have pushed for a carrier arm and a far more aggressive naval aviation approach and centric navy, a slightly different navy, it would have been him. And the most stable regime, arguably, in terms of its command structure in wartime, the Japanese, goes through 5. They have, there are lots of reasons they lose chiefs of staff. But, so it's an interesting series, and it will be interesting to talk about. So what else have we got coming up? Well, 12th of September. Brew ships, questions till the brew runs out. That's going to be today, and I might delay that a little bit on the grounds that I don't know the timings of me getting to where I'm going to be. So it might be like the one on the 5th was delayed till about 1:15 or even 6:30. I'm sorry about this, but it might be run on time, but depends where I get up to. And coming up, and this is what this series is really belonging to, is Karl Donitz on his birthday. It's fair to ask, how good was he really? And the point is, you can't really ask that question if you're not establishing a fair benchmark. And you cannot establish a fair benchmark by comparing him to British or American, basically British or American admirals. You can't. They have very different systems and very different starting points. The Royal Navy and the US Navy are starting from points of they're already massive. Yes, they've got big problems to deal with, but they're starting from points they're already massive. You have to compare him to officers who are in some positions, and that's the other chiefs of staff of the Italian, Japanese, and most importantly, German navies. But otherwise, if it was going to be just comparing a radar, it'd be a very boring video because it'd be literally live, me just comparing him with one other officer. So, before I introduce you to and compare him to these officers, I need to explain about them. I need to discuss them. So, we won't have got through all of them by the 16th. This is a 12-part series. But we will have got through a lot of them, and hopefully that will give a basis for discussing it. And finally, hello. If you've watched many of these videos, or any of these other videos, you probably already noticed, but if you haven't, and this is your first one, well, I'm wearing this hat, which comes from my Spreadshirt shop, which you can find a link to down below. Anyway, reason I'm talking about mentioning this hat and the reason I'm mentioning Spreadshirt is because on there you will find a Blackburn, again, something which is a feature of my channel, design. And there's face masks for that. And my aunt, because my family, we communicate and show our love by setting random bets, has bet that if I manage to reach 13,000 subscribers by December 31st, 2021, she and my uncle will wear Blackburn face masks, take a photo, and I'll be able to put it up in January. And I will, of course, get family bragging rights, which is even more important. So for that to happen, I need your help. I need you to like videos if you like them. If you like them. If you don't like them, then I understand not. But if you do, please do press the like. Share the videos if you like them, and subscribe if you don't subscribe. Currently, at the moment, about 60% of my viewers seem to not be subscribers. If half of those viewers subscribed, that would be a tremendous boost in numbers, and due to the way that the logarithms work for YouTube, that would increase circulation massively and might even help me get to those 13,000 subscribers. And I want to win this, but time's ticking down and I need your help to do so. So thank you very much. Hope you enjoyed these videos. And as I said, next time you see me, or next video I'm doing, I'll be somewhat different.